Hi, and welcome to my presentation, Web Services, Creating with ORDS and Accessing with Apex. I'm Colin Archer and I work for Explorer. Who are Explorer? Well, we're an Oracle Platinum Partner. We've won multiple awards such as Database Partner of the Year and Engineered Systems Partner of the Year, and we have dedicated Oracle teams for development, which I work for, database support and engineered systems. This slide shows what the development and support teams do. In development, we develop, consult, support and educate, and the support team deal with database support, migrations, upgrades, maintenance and performance tuning. So who am I? Well, my name's Colin Archer and I have many years experience in Oracle technologies including PL SQL, Forms, Reports and most recently Apex, and I work across a variety of business areas. My job at Explorer involves training, speaking at events, publishing blogs, which you can read on our website, but primarily I'm a consultant and a developer. So, on to today's agenda. I'm going to show you how to create web services with ORDS, how to protect them with OAuth2, how to test web services, and how to call them from an Apex application. What is ORDS? ORDS allows you to expose and capture data in your Oracle database using the REST protocol. It's a Java EE based alternative for Oracle HTTP server. It allows a great deal of functionality, including command line based deployment and configuration. It automatically returns SQL queries in JSON and paginates responses for the GET method services, and it supports OAuth authentication. This diagram shows the structure of web services within ORDS. Each database schema you enable for ORDS will consist of modules, templates, handlers and parameters. These make up the web services. A resource module can have multiple templates, and a template can have a handler for each HTTP method, which are GET, POST, PUT and DELETE. Oracle provide us with two APIs for defining, maintaining and protecting web services. ORDS, which is for developing the web services, and OAuth, which is for implementing OAuth authentication. For more information, take a look at the documentation on the Oracle website. The URL of a web service created with ORDS is made up of 5 elements: the host name and port, and then for each web service, the schema, module and template. Before creating any web services, the relevant schema needs to be enabled for ORDS. This is done using the enable schema procedure. As you can see from this example, the schema pattern mapping can be different from the actual schema name. Here, the database schema is called ORDS demo, but it will be referenced as API within all web service URLs. The first step is to define a resource module. In this example, we are creating the first version of an HR module. It is good practice to include a version number in your modules so that you can publish updated versions of your web services while still maintaining backwards compatibility. Oracle automatically paginates SQL queries returned in JSON format. The default is 25. This can be overwritten or can be turned off by setting the value to 0. You can see in this example I've also included a comment. Any comments you include when defining modules, templates and handlers are all included in the ORDS metadata views. I'll talk more about these later on in the presentation. The next step is to define the resource template. In this example, I'm going to be creating several web services over the dep table as part of an HR module. As before, I've included a comment. Next, the template handlers need to be defined. This is where we call our SQL and PL SQL. A template can have one handler for each method, and the methods available are GET, POST, PUT and DELETE. In this example, we're using the GET method to return the results of a SQL query on the dep table in JSON format. Therefore, the source type needs to be source type query. If you want to return the results in CSV format, then you can use source type CSV query. The source is specifying the SQL query or the PL SQL. You can also override the items per page that were defined against the module, and you can optionally include a comment. The final step is to define any parameters specified in the handler. In this example, I've used a parameter called pvdepName in a post method handler for the department's template. The bind variable name is the name we used in the handler, and the name is how it will be referenced when calling the web service. These do not have to be the same. The source can be URI, header or response. This is how the parameters are passed in and out. The data type available is string, int, double, boolean, long or timestamp. The access method can be in, out or in-out, and you can include a comment. As I've previously mentioned, the ORDS metadata schema contains a set of views. These can be used to query the web services that you've created. This SQL query returns a list of all web services and includes the comments, method, source type, URL and the number of parameters. As you can see, I've created 3 handlers for the department's resource template. A get to query the table, a post to insert into the table, and a put to update the table. I could also add a delete handler. I've also created 2 additional web services to return the list of departments and employees without any pagination in the response. This is so I can demonstrate later in the presentation how to deal with paginated and non-paginated responses. Once you've created some web services, you'll need to test them. This can be done in several ways. The simplest method is to use a browser. However, this is mostly limited to testing GET methods. You could use the command line tool curl, or you could use a REST client such as Advanced, Insomnia, Postman or SoapUI. In my opinion, this is the best option, and my current preference is to use Postman. For the purpose of this demonstration, I've already used the ORDS package to create a simple set of web services over the EMP and DEP tables. I'll now show you these web services and demonstrate how to test them using Postman. The first thing I'd like to show you is the web services that I've already created. I have a SQL query here which is going to run over the top of the ORDS metadata views. If I run that, it returns all of the web services that I've created. The one I'm looking for is the get method over the departments table. So if I copy this URL, I can go to Postman and show you how to test. This is Postman. To create a new request is very simple. All I need to do is come to where it says enter request URL and put in the URL for our web service. I also need to set the correct method, which in this instance is get, and because this web service doesn't need anything else, all I need to do is click on the send button. So that's submitted the web service request, and it's returned to us in JSON format several departments. We've got 5 here because the pagination for this particular web service is set to 5. We also automatically get URL links at the bottom to deal with the pagination. If I want to go and look at the next page of data, I can click on this next link, or I can go up to the URL here and just put the page parameter onto the end and resubmit it. And that's given us the next page of data in our last department. If I want to, I can save this request so I can run it again later on. Click on the save button, and in this pop-up, give it a name, give it a description if I want to, and then either choose an existing collection or create a new one. And click save. So what that's done over here in the collections area is created a new collection with one request in called dept. So I can come back later on and rerun this one should I want to. What you'll notice is I already have a collection over here with several of the requests to some of the web services that I previously created. For example, this one is for the departments. Now this one is for the non-paginated version. So if I click on send for this one, it calls the web service and this time gives me all of them and doesn't have any of the pagination links. I can also do the one for the employees. Again, I'm running the non-paginated one. Now, this one has the option of specifying a parameter, so I can restrict the employees that come back to a particular department. If I don't include one of these header parameters and just click on send, I get all of the employees. If I retick this one to enable it, and let's change the value to 10, when I submit this, it gives me all the employees for department 10. And again, I can change this to whatever I want to give me the different set of employees. Or I can take it out entirely, or untick it, so the parameter doesn't have a value, and then I get them all. You'll notice over here on this side of the screen you've got a little bit of information, such as the status. So this tells us it was status 200, which tells me that the web service worked successfully and returned a valid response. Other ones you might see are 401 if it was unauthorized. So if we had authentication and we hadn't authenticated our request, then you might get that. If you've got an error in the URL, you might get 404 when it's not found, or another common one is to get 500 when there's an actually internal server error. So if something's gone wrong with a web service request, that's what you'd get back. I could show you another couple here. So I've got one for adding a department and updating a department. Now you'll notice the URL for these two are absolutely identical because they're both using the same template. The only difference is one's using the post handler and one's using the put handler. So if I click on the one for adding a department, now again this has two header parameters, one for the name and one for the location. If I don't have these ticked so it doesn't include them and click on send, it's successful but returns us a 400 bad request, and that's because the PL SQL behind the scenes has validated that I don't have the correct data and returned us an error message. If I tick these to enable it, click on send, this time I get a 200 OK because the web service has been successful, and I get the department number that's been created and the message telling us the department's been created as well. If I go back to our get and click on send again, we should see now we get department 70. And the last one was the put. So this one's very similar, but this time what I can do is pass the parameter of the department I want to change and the name. So let's change the name to Technical Services instead of Tech Services and change the location to LA. If I click on send, that's called our web service and it's been successful. We've got a 200 OK and we've got a result of department updated. So if I go back to the get and resubmit this one, we should see that information change, which we do. You can protect web services with OAuth2 using the OAuth package, and there are several options available. Client credentials, a two-stage process for server-to-server communication where no human interaction is needed. Authorization code, a three-stage process with human interaction, and implicit, a two-stage process with human interaction. Protecting the web services is a three-part process. First, you need to create the ORDS roles that will be subsequently granted to clients. Next, you need to create the privileges that will protect the web services and link them to the relevant roles. And lastly, you need to map the privileges to the URLs of the web services they need to protect. So, as I said, the first step is to create the roles. A role can be allocated multiple privileges and is granted to the clients, and a client can be granted multiple roles. You can use the ORDS metadata view user ORDS roles to query what's been created. Next, we need to define the privileges which are allocated to the roles. A privilege can be linked to multiple roles. However, in this example, the privilege will only be granted to one role. The last step is to create the URL mappings that the privileges need to protect. A single privilege can protect multiple web services. You can use an asterisk as a wildcard to protect multiple web services with a single pattern. And as soon as any privilege mapping has been created, any web services that match that pattern are protected immediately. To access protected web services, you need to create clients and then grant them roles. This can be done using authorization code, implicit or client credentials. For this demonstration, I'm going to be using client credentials. When you create a client using the client credentials type, a client ID and secret is automatically generated for each client. And again, you can use the ORDS metadata view user ORDS clients to query them. I'm now going to protect some of the web services we previously tested and create some clients to access them. I will then demonstrate how to use Postman to authenticate the request calls to the protected web services. The first thing I need to do is create the roles, privileges, and then map them onto the patterns that I wish to protect. So this script here is going to create a role for employee resource and then another role for department resource. Then I define a privilege for the employee and map onto it the URL patterns for the web services that I wish to protect. And then I'm going to create a department privilege and map onto it again the pattern for the web services I wish to protect. You'll notice here that I'm not going to be protecting the web service for the non-paginated department, so that one will remain accessible, while all the other patterns will be protected and I will no longer be able to access them without authenticating first. So I'm going to run that. So to access them, I'm going to need to create some clients. So this script here is going to create client 1 and 2. Client 1 will be granted the employee role, client 2 the department role, which means employee 1 will be able to access the employee web services and client 2 the departmental web services. So I'll run that script. Now if I run the select statement over the user ORDS clients table, you can see it's created me 2 clients, and each one is being given a client ID and a secret, and this is the information we need to authenticate when we call our web services. Now we've protected our web services and created some clients to access them, we can come back to Postman and retest the calls to the web services. If I click on this departments one, now you notice this one's for the non-paginated web service and it wasn't protected. So if I click on send, we get back the department information. If I modify the URL to call the protected version and click on send, it's unsuccessful. If I come along, click on the preview, what you can see is we're getting a 401 unauthorized. I can go to the employee one. All the employee versions are protected. So if I click on send, again, we're getting the 401 unauthorized. So, how do we access them? Well, let's access the employee ones first. What we need to do is use our client credentials to generate an access token. So, on the authorization, we're going to change the type to OAuth2, and then I can click on this button here to say get new access token. Now we need to enter some details here. I've already pre-populated the fields, but we have to specify a token name, which could be anything you like, the access token URL. The first part is the same as we use for the web services, but at the end we have OAuth and token. We then need to put in our client ID and client secret, set the type to client credentials, and then all we need to do is click on request token. That's been successful and it's generated an access token for us. So if I click on it, you see the access token over here, and it tells us that it's going to expire in 3,600 seconds. So we're going to add the token to the header. I'm going to click on use token, and if you look over here, this headers will increase. So now we've got 2. So what it's done is automatically added in for us an extra parameter called authorization with the bearer and the access token, and then we still have our department number at the top. Now if I click on send, I'll put it back onto pretty so you can have a look at it. That request has been authenticated, and I can carry on using this token until that 3,600 seconds expires. So that request is now authorized. Now let's go back to the departments. Now we know this one's not authorized, so I can try it again. That's no good. So let's use that access token. So if I click on OAuth2, click on client 1 and say use access token, it'll add it into our headers. There it is. And I'm going to click on send, but it won't work. And it's still coming back as unauthorized because I'm using an access token for client 1, and client 1 does not have access to departments. So what I need to do is generate a new access token for client 2. So to do that, I'm going to click on authorization and then click get new access token. So now we're going to request a token for client 2. Again, I've already pre-filled in the details, and I've swapped the client ID and secret for the details for client 2. Click on request token, and I've now got a second token for client 2, which you can see is different to client 1. So now if I click on client 2 and say use token, you can see that this token here will now have been added to the header instead, which it has. So if I click on send now, the request is authorized. I'll go back to this mode, and you can see here, just as before, we're getting our items. And again, if I come along here, I can put the page number on the end and change pages, and I can resubmit this request as many times as I like until that token expires. I can also use this token to add a department, so I can come along to the add department one. Again, if I try and call this one, I've got the relevant headers for the department name. Let's call it Tech Services 2. I haven't added the token yet, so if I click on send, I'm getting unauthorized. But if I come along to the authorization, click on OAuth2, this token is still going to be available to use, so I click on use. It's now added that third parameter in. I click on send, and it's successful. It's now created our department, and it'll be the same for put. So I can come along here, choose OAuth2, use this token. Let's go to the headers. Let's change 80 to Tech Services 2. Click on send, and it's successful. Go back to departments. Let's change this one to the no paid pagination and click on send, and you can see that's been renamed. So all the web servers are working. If I come along to this one and untick that one, so we're not going to be sending our access token, and change this to Tech Services 10, click on send, we're unauthorized. It's not worked. If I go back to departments and resubmit that, it's not changed. For the second half of the presentation, I'm going to demonstrate how to call web services from an Apex application. I'm going to use the web services I created with ORDS and protected with OAuth2. There are two methods of accessing web services within Apex. You can define them within web service references, which is part of shared components, or you can use the package Apex Web Services. For web service references, each web service is defined within web service references in shared components. They're then accessed using a web service type process. You can easily see all the web services in your application and what parameters they're using, and it's easy to test them standalone within shared components. To create an interactive report based on a get method web service using a web service reference method, we need to do the following. Create a new web service reference within shared components. Add a web service type process to call the web service. Extract the response into a collection, and then add an interactive report region using the SQL query on the Apex collection. I will now demonstrate how to create an interactive report using the web service reference method. I've created this demo application to show you how to call web services. The first page I'm going to show you is the departments, and this is populated via the department's get web service, and it's called using the web service references method. If I click on it and open the page, you'll see it's a normal interactive report. And I can sort on it, I can filter on it, and I've got all the actions that I normally have in an interactive report. But it's populated using a web service. Let's go into the page, and first of all let's go into shared components. Under the data references section within web service references, you'll see I've got definitions here for two web services, the departments and the employees, both of them the non-paginated versions. If I click on the departments one, you can see it's got the name, the URL. I've got the HTTP method, which is obviously get, and you've got post and put and delete and so forth. And I've got the output format, which is JSON. Now this is for how the results are stored within Apex, so how I can access them. If I click on cancel, I can then show you the employees one, which is pretty much the same. However, this one, you can see it's got two entries for request headers. I need to add one for the authorization because this one uses OAuth2. The entry doesn't get automatically added, so I have to actually put the parameter there, and then the second one is for the department number. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can easily test them straight from here. If I click on the test button for the departments, if I needed to put any values in for parameters, I could put them in first, but as I don't, I can just click on the test button, and we can see we're getting our JSON formatted response. I could also test the employees one in the same way, but to do that, I'd have to put in the values for an authorization token and optionally the department. Okay, so if I go back to page 2, I can show you how the web service is called. For this particular page, I have a before header process called call department web service. If you look over here, the type is web service. The operation has been set to departments. I could also select employees. We've got a result stored in collection, and the collection name I've given it is called dep.json. I then have a second PL SQL process, and what this does is it runs a query on the Apex collections table for the department JSON collection that we created in the previous process, and it extracts the CLOB value and stores it into a local variable. The next thing I need to do with that is to parse it with the Apex JSON package and convert it to the Apex JSON tvalues type. And then once I've done that, I can simply create a new collection or truncate it if it already exists, called department, and I can loop through each of department that's in that local LJ departments variable. So we've got a function here called Apex JSON get count. That tells me how many rows there are, and then for each one I loop through and add a new member into my collection. And to get the variables that I want to put into for each record, I can use the Apex JSON get varchar2 and pull out the department number, name and location for each item. And once I've created that collection, all I need to do is have an interactive report, which is very simply a select on that collection. And if I go and run this again, as you can see, as soon as I run the page, it calls the web service. The second process loops through all the data and creates a department's collection, and then the interactive report is just a select straight onto that collection. The other method available within Apex is to use the Apex Web Service PL SQL API. With this method, there's no need to define the web service within shared components, and you don't need to create a web service type process to call it. The request call and processing of the response can be in a single block of PL SQL. To create an interactive report based on a GET method web service using the Apex Web Service API, we need to do the following. Create a PL SQL process to call the web service from your page, then process the response, and then add an interactive report region using a SQL query on the Apex collections table. I will now demonstrate how to create an interactive report using the Apex Web Services API. So, going back to our demo application, this page here is the same as the previous one, but this time it's populating using the Apex Web Service PL SQL API. As you can see, it's exactly the same as the last one, just a normal interactive report. But on this occasion, if I edit it, you can see it's populated in a different way. Again, I've got a process here on the before header, but you can see there's only one, and it's a PL SQL one. So, how have I called it? Well, very simply, this time, all I've had to do is populate the CLOB with a call to Apex Web Services make REST request, and you can see here is the URL, and I specify the type. Now this doesn't need any parameters, there's no authentication, so that's all we need to do. And then the rest of this is exactly the same as the previous example. We parse the CLOB into the local Apex JSON values type variable. We create a collection, this time called departments2, and then I'm looping through all the items it returns and extracting the department number, the name and the location for each record and adding it as a new member to the collection. And then my department's interactive report is very simply, again, a select on the Apex collections table, this time for departments2. So if I run it again, as you can see, it's an interactive report exactly the same as the previous one, but this time using the API package. To access protected web services, we need to add authentication to the request call. Early in the presentation, I protected some of the web services with OAuth2 and created clients to access them using client credentials method. To authenticate the web service call, we need to use the client ID and secret to generate an access token using the OAuth authenticate procedure. This will generate a token and give us an expiry date. We then need to add the token to the HTTP request header, and any subsequent calls can reuse the token until it's expired. I will now demonstrate how to add authentication to a web service request from Apex. Back in our demo application, you can see I've got this employees page here, and this is being populated via the OAuth2 protected get web service employees, and it's called using the web service references shared component method. If I open the page, you can see I've got a region here called department, where I've got a select list for the department and an area to show you the JSON response. Over here I've got a region for client credentials, and via a before header process I've already populated the ID and the secret, and at the bottom I've got an area for the interactive report. So let's go and select a department, As soon as I do this, it authenticates using the client credentials and generates us an access token and an expiry date. The response in JSON format is over here, and that is used to generate the interactive report. Each time I come along to here and change the department, we generate a new access token, get a new expiry date, repopulate the JSON, and then update our interactive report. So I can do this as many times as I like. Each time we get a new access token. So, how have I done this? Let's have a look at page 4. Well, to begin with, when I change the department, I submit the page, and then if I go to the processes, there's 3 that fire every time I submit the page. The first one being the call to the employee web service. So, this is again type web service, and this time the operation it's calling is the employees. Again, it's storing the results in a collection called emps.json. Now you'll notice here, if I expand this, we have our 2 parameters. Now these are automatically coming across from the declaration in shared components. If I click on authorization, you can see it allows you to specify where the value comes from. For the authorization, we need to use a PL SQL function. If I open it up, what you can see is all it does is it calls Apex Web Service OAuth Authenticate. We pass in our token URL, we pass in the client ID, and we pass in the secret. And what it's going to return is bearer suffixed with Apex Web Service OAuth get last token. So the last token that's generated gets returned. And that will automatically go into the authorization parameter. And the second parameter is the department number. And that is just mapped straight onto our department number select list. So as soon as this calls, it runs whatever it needs to do to populate the values for these 2 parameters, passes them to the web service. I've then got a second one. This is not particularly necessary, but it's just so I can show you the values on screen. I'm extracting the token so you can see it, and I'm extracting from the gauth token expires global variable the expiry time of the token. And then the last thing I need to do is populate the collection, and this is just the same as we've used before. So I'm going and doing a query on the Apex collections for the emps.json, pulling the data into a club. This time I'm showing you the value of that club, and then I'm parsing it, I'm creating or truncating my collection, and then I'm looping through, getting my count of items and adding members to my collection for the employees. And this time I'm getting all the values, but you'll notice as well as calling Apex.json get varchar2, I'm also calling Apex.json get number and Apex.json get date. So for the different types of variable, you need to use different functions. And then the last thing is just the employees report, which as before is a very simple query on the Apex collections table. And that's how, using the web service references method, we add our authentication onto our request. The next one I can show you is the same thing, but this time using the package. So as before, we've got our client ID and secret. We can select the department, and this one is working exactly the same as the other one, but isn't using the web service reference method. If I edit the page, what you can see this time is the dynamic action every time we change the department number is just calling PL SQL to call the web service straight away. So if I edit this, what you can see, the first thing it does in this instance is it checks to see if we've got a token and if it's still within the expiry date. If it is, it doesn't need to call the OAuth Authenticate to generate an access token because you can just reuse it. But the first time we come to this page, it'll use the client ID and the secret and the access token URL and generate as an access token and pull out the expiry date. Then, assuming we've got our access token, the next thing we need to do before it makes the web service call it using the make rest request, what we have to do is we have to populate our parameters. So we've got the Apex Web Service gRequest headers, and I'm specifying the name, which in the first one is authorization, and the value for the first one, which is bearer, and then our token. And then the second one is department number, and the value is whatever we've selected in the P5 department number select list. Then I just call the request as I've done previously, and after that it's just a simple case of parsing the CLOB that's returned, creating or truncating our collection, getting the count, and looping through, populating the members of the collection with the values that I'm extracting, just the same as we've done several times before. And the last thing I'm doing is just showing you the value of the CLOB on screen. So far the demonstration has only called web services returning non-paginated JSON responses. This is fine when a web service does not return many rows, but would be far too slow for ones that could potentially return hundreds or even thousands of rows. For this reason, the responses are typically paginated. The response items will be batched into pages. They will include URL links for the next and previous pages. The links can be extracted from the response text using the Apex JSON package, and then invoke the web service again to obtain the new page of data. The URL links can be added to the Apex page to control the report pagination. I will now demonstrate a web service returning paginated response within Apex. Back in our demo application, I have this page here, and it's a paginated classic report populated via the employee get web service, and it's called using the Apex Web Service PL SQL API with next and previous links extracted from the JSON response. Let's have a look. So I've got our department area up here with our department select list. I'm showing the JSON response, and as you can see, we're only getting 5 records, and we have got the links at the bottom of the JSON response. And here I'm extracting from that response the 3 links, should we have them. We don't have a previous link at the moment because it's only showing page 1, so therefore we have no data here. And I have corresponding buttons over here, which when you click on them, they'll resubmit the call to the web service using the relevant link. And at the bottom, I've got our classic report. So I'm showing all employees because I'm not selecting an individual department. So I'll click on next. It resubmits the web service, and this time I get the next set of employees, and now I've got a previous, a next, and a first URL which I'm extracting from here. Click on next again, and this time I've got the next set again, and then if I click on next again, it takes us to the end. So we haven't got a next anymore because we're on the last record, but I have got a previous and a first, and now I can scroll back through should I want to. If I change the selection to have a look at another department, we go back to page 1. Again, we're not getting an extra previous because we've only got 3 employees. Look at sales. Sales does have more than 1 page of employees, so I can go to next. But that's the end because there's only 2 pages. So, how is this all working? Let's go and have a look at page 6. Right, the first thing you notice is I've got page 6 selection here for the department. And what that's doing is every time you change the department, it's populating a variable called P6 URL with the standard web service URL for employees. And then it's triggering a dynamic action called Call Employee API. Let's go and have a look at that. So this here it is here, and all this is doing is find some PL SQL, and this should now look a bit familiar. So what it's doing is it's authenticating with the client ID and secret, getting the token, and then it's setting our parameters for the token and the department we have selected, and then it's making the REST request via the package to populate the CLOB. But this time it's using the value in P6 URL. I've also got an MVL around it just in case it's ever null with a standard web service URL, and it's telling it that it's the get method. Then we parse our response, we truncate or create the collection, we get the number of records returned, loop round them, and then I'm extracting here down at the bottom the next, the first and the previous links, and I'm doing that just the same as I've done previously with the Apex JSON get varchar2, but this time I'm looking for next ref, first ref and previous reference. So using the same built-ins that we've used before, when I call them, that's how they're generated. And what I'm doing is, if you look at these 3 buttons here, you've got first, previous and next. What you'll see is if we have a look at what they're doing is they're very simply taking the value that we've extracted for the next and setting it to the P6 URL. And that's the same for the previous, but using the previous one, and the same for the first. And then all we're doing is a bit of JavaScript to call our dynamic action. So when I change the department, it resets it back to the standard URL, and if we use the next, previous or first link, it sets it, the URL, to whatever we've extracted from our JSON response. So I'll just run that again. So as you can see, if I go and select all, resets it back again, pulls out the links. If I click on that next, what it's going to do is take this value here, populate it into our hidden variable P6 URL, and it's going to use that for the web service call. And there you go. That's how you add pagination to a report from a JSON response web service. The response for an Apex web service is made up of several elements. The main response text, which is typically returned into a CLOB in JSON format, the status code, which is held in the G status code global, the HTTP headers, which are stored in the G headers global, and the cookies, which are stored in the G responses cookie global. I will now demonstrate extracting some of the different response elements within Apex. The last page in our demo application is for adding a department. So it adds a department to the dep table via the department's post web service, and we call it using the Apex Web Service PL SQL API with results extracted from the JSON response. Let's go and have a look at this page. So this first section here in this region, we've got the details where we specify the name and location, and then the add department button. So when I press that button, it's going to call the web service, use the client ID and secret to authenticate, and pass these details in and add a department. Over here I'm displaying any response headers, and over here I've just got a query over the departments to show you what's in that table. So first of all, let's just click the add without giving a name or a location. So that's given us an error. So I've got a response status of 400, and I've got unable to create department name, name not provided as an error message. And down in the header section, I've got a standard content type and a connection closed header, and then a custom one that I've entered saying web service unsuccessful, try again. So let's give our department a name. Let's call it HR in LA and click on add department, see what happens. Again, this one's failed. So the status code has been set to 400, and I've got a different error message because it's telling me it's a duplicate name. And again, the headers are the same with our custom one saying unsuccessful, try again. Let's try and get one that works this time. So let's say HR2 in LA. This time it should be successful. Click on add department. This time I've got a success message saying new department created. It's given me the department number, and I'm confirming the response status was 200. And down at the bottom, our custom header is saying web service successful, department created. And if you notice, department 100 now exists. So how am I doing all this? Let's have a look at page 7. So every time I click on the button, it calls these actions. The first one being some PL SQL. So a lot of this should look quite familiar now. First thing I'm doing is I'm creating or truncating my response headers collection, which is where the response headers are being stored. I'm authenticating with my client ID and secret, and then I'm setting my parameters. So I need a parameter for the authorization token, I need one for the department name, and I need one for the location. Then I'm calling a web service with the make REST request, passing into the URL, and this time telling it it's a post transaction. Then I'm parsing the response, and then I'm processing that response and extracting out of it with the Apex JSON get varchar to the department number and the result, because that's what I'm expecting to find. And I'm also setting the status code using the gstatus global from Apex Web Services. So that gives me the 200 or the 400 code. And the next thing I'm doing is I'm getting the response headers. So again, I'm doing a loop round So I'm using the Apex Web Services gheaders global, and I'm getting a count to see how many I've got. Then I'm looping through for each one and adding the values into this collection. So I'm using the gheaders with the number, getting the name and the value. So we know the 3 headers, so this loops around 3 times, getting those values. And the last thing I'm doing is, if the status was 200, I'm just clearing out the name and location because I know it's been successful. Then I'm doing a refresh of the departments region. I'm doing a refresh of the headers region. And the last thing I'm doing is a bit of JavaScript. And what that's doing is it's just extracting the 3 values for the department number, the result and the status. And I'm just doing a check. So if the status is 200, I'm doing an Apex message show success. And I'm just showing the department number and the response status. Otherwise, if it failed, I'm doing an Apex message clear errors and then show errors, and setting it to show the status and show the error message. That's the end of the presentation. I hope you found it useful. We've briefly covered how to create web services using ORDS and to protect them with OAuth2, how to test them with a REST client like Postman, and how to access and use web services within an Apex application. If you'd like to learn more, you can visit our website. We regularly post blogs on there, and you can email me at colin.archer@explorer.uk.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at Explorer UK Limited. Thank you for listening.